Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson.
My friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. And if you are not watching us on YouTube right now, I say run, don't walk, so you can see Curt's fashion today. This shirt is incredible. I like it. I mean,
well, thanks.
Yeah, you upped your game. What can I say?
Well, look at what I'm looking at. Yeah, I'm inspired.
I don't know.
Is that a leopard shirt you got on? No, what is that?
What
it
shirt?
looks like. Is that a leopard shirt? Wait, no. What is that like? Look like flowers?
I guess they're like clovers or flowers or something. I don't know.
It's very cool.
I don't know. Thank you.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, right on.
A great way to start a podcast is talking about fashion and the clothes that we're wearing. People must be riveted right now.
I mean, they're calling their friends. Like, you gotta turn this on.
You gotta listen to this. It's riveting. So we are here in episode 10 of season 5 of the Being Known podcast. And this season, we have been going through Curt's second book, The Soul of Shame. And we are coming to the end of the book today. We are in chapter 9, the final chapter of the book. And the chapter is entitled Renewing Vocational Creativity. Curt, this has been a great season. I loved this book when I read it the first time, but I feel like I've gotten so much more out of it by being able to have these conversations with you. And I'm hopeful that our listeners are having the same experience, because the conversation that we're having, which just sort of brings the chapters even more to life, and then you've created these applications for people to integrate this work into their lives. It's just been fabulous. Thanks for all the work you've done this season.
Thanks. Thank you. It's been great to revisit this book that has, I guess now 6 years it's been out, I think. Yeah, wow. 6, 7 years, 2015. I guess 2015. So 7 years it's been out, and apparently it continues to appeal to folks, and I think they're finding it to be helpful. And we continue to hear from our listeners that the podcast, the conversations that we're having, just add for that much more animation and that much more kind of practical application for the work that we're talking about. So it's been a ton of fun to have a conversation with you about this going forward. It's just been great. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So set us up. Let's talk about Henry.
So in this last chapter, we're again, I think we're trying to, we've said from the beginning that, we're talking about shame, but shame is embedded in the larger story, and the story that God intended for us was that we were intended to be co-creators, co-cultivators, co-steward. We were to steward on his behalf on the earth. We were to steward the earth that God has put before us. So, and that includes all kinds of things that we do. We garden, we teach, we act, we treat patients, we we steward the law, we make furniture, we dig ditches, we pick up trash, we do all these different things that we're doing as a way to steward the world. And evil's intention is not just to make us feel bad. We've said this over and over. It's not just to make us feel bad using shame. It is intended to disrupt and devour God's intended mission for this to be a place of cultivated beauty and goodness. And we do that through the work that we do. And Henry was a guy who his intention, his hope was to do work in the field of finance, and such that he could, he was working in a company where it had its purpose of working with people who were investing lots of money, but he also wanted to be able to do microfinance and working with people who were, not as well off, but to be able to steward that really well. But he worked in a division where his boss was really kind of always cracking the whip in terms of what the numbers look like. And as much as it was well intended to try to get this division to do and perform and so forth and so on, Henry was really it's really difficult to be in this system where your boss is always kind of keeping a ledger of like what you're doing, and are you doing it well enough, and comparing you to other people and so forth and so on. And people come into our office for all, with all kinds of complaints about what they're experiencing psychiatrically. And when Henry came in, he doesn't come in and say, I think I'm in a shame-filled system. His system where he was working, that was taking up most of his waking space and hours, just like in our last episode, we talked about how school takes up most of our waking hours in the first couple of decades of our lives. He doesn't come in to say, I think I'm in a system that's, off kilter. He comes in to say, like, I'm having these symptoms personally, without being aware of the toll that the system was taking on him, without being aware that what he was experiencing internally was mirrored in and through the system that he was operating in. And so part of our work was to invite him to be curious about not just his personal experience internally with his symptoms, but also how is that a reflection of the system that he's occupying, where he's embedded, but that also embeds him, that also squeezes him, attempts to squeeze him into its mold. And this brings us to this question of what we are called to do. We get back to this notion of vocare, the vocal call that we are called. And my friend Andy Crouch has a really beautiful way of naming this. We often, this language is talked about in all kinds of settings. It doesn't even have to be within settings that are necessarily faith-based. There are lots of people who say, well, I have a calling to be an artist. I have a calling to run this nonprofit. And these may be people that have no sense of God even being in the picture, but they have this felt internal sense of like, this is what I was made to do. And but we use the words, it's interesting. We use the word calling. Even if you're not a Christian, people will use this word calling because there is this, we can't get away from it. We love the notion that this thing that I'm doing, that I want to do, I have been asked by somebody else. I'm called by somebody else. I can't help but want to be doing this at the behest of somebody who sees this vision for me, wherein which I'm not doing it by myself. But we can say, I'm called to be a psychiatrist. I'm called to be an actor. And Andy would say, well, actually, we're not actually specifically called to be a psychiatrist or a fireman or a teacher or this. We're called to do two things in the world. And he would say that we are called to bear the image of God, and we are called to restore the image of God wherever and whenever, in whatever domain that we occupy, that we are always in the business of being called to bear and restore the image of God. Because, if something were to happen to me and I was no longer able to be a psychiatrist, would that mean that somehow, because that got cut off, I was no longer, like, my calling, I don't have my calling? No, I'm still now. I mean, if I were to have a stroke that would keep me from being able to do my work, I would still be called to bear and restore the image of God to the degree that I was able, no matter what my circumstance was. And so every act in life, including the ones that we act in where we get paid, every act in life has the potential for us to create and steward beauty and goodness. And so even Henry, like his longing was to create beauty and goodness in these kinds of ways. And then, as we like to say, evil will match us toe to toe with shame. You're smiling at something.
No, I'm just listening. No, continue, please.
Yeah, and so, I mean, like, as we like to say, right, evil does its best work in the middle of good work being done. It waits for us to start down the path of creating things. Like Henry wanted to start down this path of eventually creating work for others, creating opportunities for others. And it was just so difficult in this particular system until he was able to make changes that would put him in a different space. And so then the question becomes, what do we do about the systems that we are in? Because sometimes the systems are not going to change. They had no intention of changing. We would say this is the way that the principalities and powers of the world that really do exist, right? We think that those things are just, make believe, stuff made up by ancient writers who didn't know what we know now because of all of our brilliance in science and so forth and so on. We would say that's like our brilliance in science has no idea what it's up against. Like it almost makes you want to say a bad word. Like we have no idea what we're up against. But evil would love nothing more than for us to think that we're not up against anything. And Henry was up against it. And so what we see then when we ask the question, well, what are we to do? We see that the Bible has models for us in the same way that earlier, when we talked about the development of a healing cloud of witnesses, right? The Bible gives us a model, first and foremost, in Jesus. Jesus is the North Star for all these things. And what he does with the community that he surrounds himself with. Notice, they weren't superstars, right? They were fishermen, they were peasants, they were, we got a tax collector, and, he's wealthy, but he's hated. So, like, just for good measure, like, it's like we're going to bring people in who've got means, but we're not going to like them very much. So, like, he's collecting all kinds, and he invites one guy in who's like, throws him under the bus at the end of the, not like he was, Judas wasn't alone in that. I mean, Peter did too. We could talk about that forever and a day, but the point is that Jesus is the North Star with all this, about how do we then imagine ourselves being outposts of goodness and beauty, in which we can then, in our places, the domains that we occupy, whether we're parenting, whether we're working in a bakery, but especially when we are in positions of some kind of authority. And by that, you don't have to own the bakery, but you have authority over the moment that you occupy when you're dealing with a customer. Like you're the author of this moment. You are co-authoring this moment with God. That customer walks in, you don't know where they're coming from in terms of their life, so forth. But in that moment, the kingdom of heaven is intersecting with the kingdom of this earth, and Jesus wants to own it. Jesus wants to steward. Jesus wants to, and like through you, he wants to be king over this moment. And so we step up to the counter, invite the customer, and we're already going to be curious about how is God going to create beauty and goodness in this moment. And we might think, well, come on, Curt, that's just like, is it really that big of a deal? Like, look, all of life is an accumulation of small interactions at the counter at the bakery. Mm-hmm. That's what life is. Russia didn't just wake up one day and decide we're going to invade Ukraine. It's an accumulation of hundreds of thousands of small moments of wounding and trauma, of shame being on the loose. Collectively, by the time the Russian tanks enter Ukraine, by any violence, right? By the time any of this happens, most of the moments of deciding about that have long been in our rearview mirror. We don't even know how we got here. And so we have a model in the scriptures that can help us reimagine this. And this model that I see is in the 12th and 13th chapters of 1 Corinthians. And we're just going to, you can read the book. We're not going to go, line by line here, but we're going to talk just a little bit about this. And we begin with the 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians and the 4th through the 11th verses. And we see that in this particular section, Paul is talking about the notion of how we have differences in our communities. He begins with the assumption that we have different gifts, we have different things, and that part of the challenging is that when we have different gifts, when we read those verses, that God's given different gifts to different people, we, in our culture, we interpret different as being either better or worse.
Yeah.
And like, I will tell you, like, dude, I am the chief among sinners. I had an experience recently in which I was doing some work with I was doing some consulting with a particular group of people, and they've been really generous and kind, and they and I'd introduced them to some work to the work of another person, and they rightly thought, oh my gosh, maybe we could get that other person to also come in and do some work with us because it would be really helpful. And truly, it would. It would truly. It would like and the reality is the part of me that wants them to benefit from that other person and who I know and I admire and love and like it's just but no, like what did I feel? Like the part of me that was feeling like I was being pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
Like what? Like I'm not enough for you? I'm not enough. I'm not enough as a consultant for this. This is what I do. In my head, we don't have just different gifts. We have gifts where apparently now I'm no longer wanted in this. I mean, this is what my head does. This is who my wife has to live with. This is who my kids have to live. This is what you have to put up with. Like I'm okay as long as I'm okay until I'm not. And so I like the tyranny of comparison. Like this is what shame does. It has me immediately interpreting different as being better or worse. But Paul's saying like, no, this is different by design, that this is done with loving kindness, that this is done as a way for us then, and then he starts in this comparison of the body. And this is where things get really interesting because there are assumptions made in the Hebrew, Jewish, and Christian tradition, assumptions made in the ancient world about the body that was categorically different from any of the cultures around it. And that is that they considered the body to be a precious temple. That's what the Romans, the Babylonians, the Persians, like the bodies were to be used. Bodies were commodities. And if you weren't a citizen, certainly of Rome, or if you weren't a Babylonian, you could use anybody else's body however you pleased. For sex, for slavery, like you could do pretty much whatever you wanted. The body was not held to be that important. And then you take the whole notion of what the Romans did with bodies when they crucified them. They weren't just punishing the victim. It wasn't just, they were using Jesus' body as a way to shame the culture. And Paul turns this whole thing on its head. Where he comes back, and we're different parts of out of the blue, you've got this guy who's using the language of the body to reconfigure our notion of our relationship with God. There's no historical indication that even in the Jewish tradition that we have that much close, intimate connection with God. We are God's servants. We are God's creation. We're certainly loved by God, but the notion that we're part of God's body, that we are connected in that kind of an intimate way, completely new to anybody who's reading this. It's an invitation to intimacy like we've never seen before. And then what we see in our modern day, like we would see from a language of interpersonal neurobiology, is this sense of like, I've got this linkage of differentiated parts, as we've often talked about. And what Paul is talking about is that this sense of being connected in this way is going to bring us to a place of wholeness, not just as individuals, but as a community. This is what we're intended to do. And I want to suggest to our listeners that every single domain in which we operate, whether it's in our school or our company or wherever it is, it can be seen in this same light. This is a body in which there are leaders, there are different parts of this, and we are going to be tempted to compare. We are going to be tempted to say they're better or worse. We're going to be tempted why did I not get enough? Why did I should have gotten more of a bonus. I should have got, now this is not speaking about issues of justice. This is not saying that that these systems don't have problems, but I'm saying like, we're always looking around and saying, just like I do, like, well, why do I not rate now? And Paul's saying, oh, no. in this body. And of course, remember, like he's writing with chapter 13 in mind. It's coming. He's writing chapter 12 with chapter 13 in his mind about what we get to love and what love is going to, this love is driving this whole thing. Evil's intention is to disintegrate the whole project in these places of our vocation, in these places where we do our work, not just in the privacy of my mind. And that's what was happening for Henry. Henry wasn't just an individual who was in a system. Like, evil wants to use everything that's going on in that system to disintegrate the people and the system as well, because this is what we're really up against. And the way then Paul structures this whole notion about the body, he takes, 12 through 14, he talks about these different body parts, verses 12 through 14. Verses 15 through 20, we would read that and see how, he says, like, one body part says, well, because I'm not an eye, then I don't matter. This is the self-condemnation. This is where it all begins. And then in verses 21 through 26, it's just the opposite. There's the part of this as well, because you're only a foot, you don't belong. I share my condemnation with you since I have so much of it to give. And then we get to verses 22 and 23, where he really starts to for this community, it would be very weird, so life upending, where he then goes and says, he talks about the indispensability of the weaker and the less honorable parts. He's saying, all of you who are underperforming, I want to find out what's going on with you. I don't just want to cut you off. No, it's those of us who are sick who need the doctor. And so we think about those people in our communities, in our churches, in our businesses. Like, it's the student who's not doing well. It's the worker who's not doing. And again, this is not to say that people don't need to, be drawn to requirements about how they work and perform and so forth. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the way shame wants to work its way into the very fabric of what we are doing vocationally in the world, because we are pushing against a system, not just individual things within me. Those are true, and they are in resonant concert with the evil that's in the world that's trying to devour everything. And so there's this paradox of Paul saying, first, in this community, you do not self-condemn, you do not condemn the other, and in fact, we pay a lot of extra attention to those who are more vulnerable. And this then leads to this notion of how, when he talks about the body, this power of embodiment, and when he talks about how, like, the antithesis of shame is this way of love, but I'm going to show you a greater way. And this greater way is an embodied way at the same time. This is why he's talking about it. Like, shame just isn't this abstraction. It is a thing that is lived out in the words that I speak, in the things I do with my body, in the places I go and don't go, all these kinds of things. And the power of embodiment. So paying attention to that is important. Honoring the body and the things that we do or don't do with our bodies is hugely important in ways that the Babylonians and the Romans would have just seen as dispensable. And then Paul makes the turn, in which he really starts to counter evil's work of shame with this entire chapter of 1 Corinthians 13. And it's such a beautiful, most of it is poetry, as it turns out, which if we were to read the Greek, it would be mostly poetry. So it's not just prose, it's not just like a list of facts. But what he's really doing is getting us to this place. So I think it's really interesting and powerful that his invitation for us to consider love, he doesn't write about it. He poetically brings us into it. Right? He's going to talk about beauty by even the way he's going to write, like, I think you get, like we're going to use poetry to describe the beauty that we're trying to get at. The first 3 verses, Paul writes about what love is not. What love is not. like if I were a clanging cymbal, if I were all these things, but I don't have love. If I did all these good things, but I don't do it lovingly. And here's where we see that what Paul is really doing, even though he uses love as a noun, he's really talking about love as an adverb. Am I doing something lovingly? In this sense, love doesn't exist in the world as a standalone thing. There are only loving acts, loving thoughts, loving intentions. Love only, it doesn't exist independently. It exists as an act that is relationally mediated. Always. It's a movement toward another. Love is always involves a movement of me toward someone. Evil wants to use shame to stop that movement. And then Paul gets to verses 4-7, and he starts to talk about what love actually is. And it's all, and in those verses, when we see what love is and what it means for us to act lovingly, we really get to see the picture that, oh, life is about the struggle between love and shame. In any given moment, any moment where we have some kind of pause, any given moment where we have something of distress that comes up, any given moment where I'm standing at the counter of the bakery and something happens. Shame in that moment. Evil is trying to use shame to dominate love. Evil is trying to use shame to push love to the margin. And so it's a struggle. But it is a struggle that eventually moves us. If we read verses 8-13, we move further and closer and closer to this notion that eventually love brings us to this place where we will eventually know even as we are known. And to be known lovingly, not known just, oh God, I'm known by God, and as a result, like he's going to ask me to leave his heaven. No, I'm known and invited in, despite what is true. And what we are saying is that when we practice love long enough and deeply enough, we become the kind of person who also knows, we know another in the same way that we've been known. I'm going to know you. And what that means is I don't just know about you. I don't know facts about you. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to condemn. I'm not here to grade your paper. I'm here to give you the experience of being known and loved by me. That's what it means for me to know. It is not, for me to know is not for me to know as our first parents wanted to know, by taking from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by knowing everything that I can know, everything that can be known, in order for me to become Elohim, one of the gods. Rather, I'm being known in order to know others in that same way, not to dominate them, but to enable them to become who they were also most lovingly made to become. Which in terms of leadership in our places of vocation, that's what we're doing. No matter what it is, or if we're creating software with other people, I want to do whatever it is that I can do that enables you to become the person that is the most flourishing version of you. And I want to give you the opportunity to be known by me, so that where shame lurks in your life in ways that are, keeping you from even doing your work here in this space, well, I want to give you the opportunity to be known by me such that we can pull that into the light and then disallow shame from having that kind of authority for you. And to be known means that I'm going to gaze at Jesus' gaze, because these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. This notion that faith is a trusting relationship, and I'm going to trust his gaze. And in that trusting, faithful relationship, over enough time, this, through neuroplastic reinforcement, creates the possibility in me to anticipate a future based on these moments of gazing. That anticipated future is one that is hopeful. These three remain: faith, hope, and hope is what grounds me in the present moment, that is informed by God's future, as N.T. Wright would say, God's future coming forward into our present moment. I can be hopeful because of what I see that's coming in the future. That hope generates my willingness, even in my suffering, to persevere, that builds character, that reinforces hope, that sits me in the middle of this relationship with God, that circles back around, that enables me to once again be present in my suffering and to continue to persevere. And it just becomes this cycle, this living cycle. Suffering, perseverance, character, hope, glory, back to suffering, and so forth and so on. And leaving no room for shame, because this hope does not put us to shame. And all this is what it means for us to be loved, and then to know as even as we are known. Love being the greatest that remains under all these circumstances. And so we see how shame is mitigated and then eliminated by gazing at Jesus, which enables us to manufacture hope in this cycle that is strengthened. And so we talk then about, in the book, we talk about and how Henry eventually came to talk about how we renew our vocational mind. The part of me, I'm not just trying to know all this stuff to feel better about myself so that I can be, I'm happier when I'm on vacation. It is something that really invites me to reimagine and expand that imagination into what am I doing in the domains that I occupy, including the places that I work. We talk about how the prefrontal cortex in the brain is like the leader of the brain. And it is the place where we work and move with intention, on purpose, toward integration, toward becoming whole, even as our Father in heaven is also whole. Leaders are intended to do this. There are ways then in which, as leaders, if we are going to lead through vulnerability, that vulnerability creates the possibility of vulnerability in the people that we're leading, which creates the opportunity for the light to come to the places where shame in their stories is preventing them from taking the proper risks that they would want to take in that educational institution, in that company, in that church where you occupy a leadership role. And where what we're really doing is also, in the very same way that Jesus did in all the villages that he visited, is he's really giving people the opportunity for healing. Who would have thought that running a law practice is really creating an opportunity for the people, not just your clients, but the people who work there. It creates the opportunity for those fellow attorneys to find healing because of the work that they're doing. Who would have thought that if I'm going to work at a school, that the school itself becomes an opportunity to find healing? In the work that we do with our practice, we often talk about and reinforce this notion that we want the people who come and work in our practice to really feel as if they are as well cared for as the patients that they're taking care of.
Yeah. And
we intend to make sure that, to the degree that that whatever's going on in their life, whatever's happening as far as their work is concerned, we're not doing marriage therapy with them, but to the degree that they are feeling things, sensing things where shame wants to show up in their work, we want our practice to be a place where they can name that in order for them to know healing and therefore greater comfort and confidence, and where the kingdom of God shows up in even greater ways, because they're now not burning energy trying to manage that shame in the process. And so this paradox of vulnerability, where we, kind of coming full circle back to where we began, this notion that in our vulnerability, even in our places where we do work, mirrors and extends Good Friday. Good Friday, that is the ultimate expression of any moment in human history of vulnerability, that eventually leads to Jesus' death, but that eventually leads to resurrection and ascension. And we really do believe that as we are living more vulnerably, wisely in the context of our vocational spaces, that we become goodness and beauty such that the work that is actually done is given the greater opportunity to become goodness and beauty and light and salt, even in those spaces that the work itself is transformed, not just the personal lives of the people who work there. And in so doing, with all of this, we come back to say, we want to be storytellers that tell the gospel story along with God. We want to tell that story. We talked in the last episode about how it is that we learn what the story is and how the story is told in our primal developmental places, in our family, in our church, in our schools. And at the end of the day, we want to ask the question, what story will our soul tell? What story is it telling at any given moment? And the beauty of the gospel is that, it doesn't take much. You look around and say, like, gosh, the story that we're listening, being told around is not a very pleasant one. But the gospel comes and says, that's not the end of the story. The gospel comes and says that it is the very beginning of the story as it really is. And it's one of beauty and goodness and hope. And that's really good news.
That is good news. I keep going back to this idea of the bakery counter, the moments, and how we can bring goodness and beauty into those moments.
Right.
A lot of times we, I shouldn't say we, a lot of times I think that, I need to be doing bigger things and affecting things in a bigger way when in reality, it's those moments that are the most important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Do you have an application for us today, Curt?
Yeah. So would love you, our listeners, this week to just reflect, and as we often do, not just to reflect, not just to think in the privacy of your own mind, but to write out how shame has attempted to control the narrative of your vocational life. Now, for some, this is the first time you're even thinking about this. But bear in mind that your vocational life, the things that we do often for a living, but we're not all of our vocational. It's not all about what we get paid to do. We're being spouses, we're being parents, we're being sons and daughters and friends, right? We have these different domains of our calling to bear and restore the image of God. But where has shame attempted to control the narrative of those systems for us? And how does it present itself as self-condemnation or then other condemnation, like what Paul is essentially writing about in chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, this notion of that's in this body, we don't do that. That's not what we do. Reflect especially on what it means for us to honor those parts of us that seem to be less than. The parts of us that we would not I want to get rid of those parts. And where do you see yourself then having a hard time honoring parts that in any of these systems also feel less than, as it were? And then stretching it out a little bit more, how would you see your place of work being revitalized by envisioning it through the lens that we've described in this episode? And with whom could you begin to speak to explore how your place of work can become itself one of these outposts of beauty and goodness by seeing it as a place where what you are actually doing is developing a community of faith, hope, and love in that context? This is work that we call it work for a reason. It takes effort. This is, we'll hear this podcast. We're like, oh, you might think, oh, those might be inspirational ideas. You might think that. But these are ideas that require work if they're going to be embodied, because they aren't going to be just thought into being. They have to be acted, prayed deeply, immersed in the scriptures, immersed in spiritual practices that don't allow evil to have a foothold. Because if you take any of this seriously, evil will take you, as we said, take you that much more seriously and will plan on going toe to toe with you. And so we can't be surprised at that. But that's our application for today, and hope that you all find that in that to be something that could be helpful.
Thank you, Curt. this really concludes our journey through the soul of shame. However, next week we will be coming to you with taking your questions. So we open it up to ask us anything you would like to know about this season.
Especially where you got that shirt.
Where Curt got that shirt. That's exactly right.
No, where you got that shirt.
Inquiring minds want to know. And so what you can do is you can email us at beingknownpodcast@icloud.com. Amy decided to make it the most confusing email address in the world, so that it would make it just as difficult as possible. So I'll tell you that again. It is beingknownpodcast@icloud.com. Ask us your questions. They can be they don't have to be totally serious all the time. You can ask us some fun questions or whatever, and we'll be back to answer those for you next week. So Curt, thanks for this season. It's been fantastic. Thanks for all your work with this book that you wrote years ago, and for bringing your work every week as you have here to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Good to be with you.
You too. And if you're watching on YouTube, Amy's going to be joining us in just a couple seconds.
Hey, Aim.
Hello, Amy.
Being Known Podcast at iCloud.com. It's not like it was giraffes like apples.
Yeah, but giraffes like apples would be so much easier to remember.
For our listeners, maybe. That was so good. I say that after every episode. And I mean it most of the time. I mean it a lot.
Wow. Okay.
Nice.
I'm kidding.
Hey, did we say that we can't wait? It's right. We can't wait until that. We can't wait for that live recording.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I had a thought and a story. And I think we've talked before. I love structure. And so I like the if blank, then blank as structure, right? And
that's like is that part of our podcast address? Is it if?
Yes, it is. It's if _, blank _ I'm going to fill in the blank right now.
Okay.
But I thought about that with if there is self-condemnation or judgment of others, then there's pretty good chance shame is there, right?
It's the source of it, right? I mean, shame is on the loose. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like when that rises up in me, then I'm being robbed of something. Shame is robbing me of something.
Yeah.
And one of your lines in the book, every minute of every day, we choose between love and shame. And that makes me think, like you said, Pep, and we both said the bakery counter, like there's an opportunity at every turn. We're making a choice.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that happens, over the long haul, I mean, and this, we sometimes think like, why is God taking such a long time to, bring his kingdom to its fullness? Why is he taking such a long time with me? Like, why is it so hard for me to get my life in order over time? And in some respects, we'd say, well, God is just being thorough. He's working really hard to make sure that we get all the ground covered, because evil has been, we have taken such a long time developing this narrative of shame over such a long time that, we're pushing against such a really hard thing to do. And part of how that story has unfolded is the included in all this is, and what shame has done is that it has minimized my awareness of the significance of my life in a very short, brief, small moment. I don't have any, like, unless I'm doing something that clearly and plainly to everybody. You were saying this earlier, Pep, in the, like, unless it's big,
Right.
like, unless I'm doing something really significant that's, I don't know, obviously significant to everybody in my, then I don't feel like, I don't see how this moment at the bakery counter can be all that big of a deal,
Right.
because I don't see myself as being that big of a deal. And that is because of the work that how evil has used shame, not just in my life, but over the millennia of what it has meant for us to be humans.
And my you guys get to figure out how the connection, but there's a connection in this story. But I was thinking about like the body of believers, the confessional communities, and this story kept coming to mind. But one of my teachers took us to the San Francisco Modern Museum of Art, and our task was to, after the visit, write a review on a piece of art. So I found my piece of art, I wrote the review, and then when my teacher was giving back our papers, she said she wanted to talk to me, and this doesn't usually go well. So
wait, were this high school? What was this? How old were you?
College.
Okay. Okay.
And she said, Amy, you could be an art critic. And I was like, and clearly I'm not an art critic, but it was just like, I was stunned. I was taking it in, and she just said, and then she pointed out some things that I did in the paper. And so she was effusive. She didn't just say you could be an art critic, but she was telling me how she got there. And it was like, it takes the body. Well, and then I thought, okay, when I have my AirPods in, I'm reliant on you guys telling me if there's noise outside. Like I can't hear it because it's noise canceling. And I thought oftentimes it takes people outside of ourselves to see it in us.
Right.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, the body, the confessional communities, it's like gold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this podcast is it's a living, breathing example of this. I mean, it was the two of you, Amy in particular, like how many years ago, began to, you don't have to raise your eyebrows and roll your eyes.
I'm like, it was, well, but there's beauty in that, right?
Do you know that rolling the eye roll is the single most powerful nonverbal cue of contempt that we human beings
Did I roll my
people?
Eyes? Oh, Pep just rolled his eyes. Did I roll my eyes?
Pep didn't just roll his eyes. Pep rolled his entire
his body.
Head. Like his eyes rolled, and his eyes rolled, and his head had to follow them. Like the momentum, like they're that powerful. They just took the entire cranium with them.
I do not like it. I like that's when somebody rolls their eyes at me.
Oh yeah.
Right. But here's the other thing too. I know that we're off track for just a moment, but not so much, because like the eye roll when it's serious, like when it really is seriously like an act of contempt.
Yeah.
It is the worst. It is the worst. And simultaneously, like anything else, how many times have we on this podcast? We're poking fun at each other, and we do so because those moments, and even like the eye roll, right? They because of the nature of our relationships with each other, the Holy Spirit actually transforms the very thing that our body typically uses those actions, and does the very opposite. So Hadrian's Pantheon in Rome, I don't know if you've ever been there, to this massive structure that I'm like, how in the world, in whatever it was, 200 somewhere AD, how they put these pillars and the the dome, and I don't get it. It is, it was built for the gods. And it is now a Catholic house of worship. And so this notion that, first of all, so this is an off-road excursion about how the gospel even takes all the things that evil would want to do in the way it usually manipulates stuff and transforms that. So all the things that we say and look at all the things that happen here, we know are happening as a way to actually, they're all bids for intimacy. They're all bids for greater connection. They're all bids for like saying, yep, I'm going to roll my eyes at you, because you know that what it really says is the very opposite of what it often means in most circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, Amy, like, I don't know how many years ago you started to talk about this.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't imagine it. It's not like I wasn't even, it's not like I didn't have like an allergic reaction where I was bad. Like I couldn't imagine it. And that every now and then you just come back around to this. And I know that you and Pepper were talking about this, and then the two of you would talk to me about this. And somewhere along the line, like the penny drops.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing happens because the two of you kept persevering and just naming. Like, let's imagine this together. I mean, so it's another example. Like, I can't see it before you see it.
Right. It's like her saying to me, you could be an art critic. It's me
right.
saying
Exactly.
you could be an art critic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Pep, I have a question. Wait, is your that's a great story. I love that story, by the way. It's so the antithesis of what shame does.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I as you were talking about the podcast, I was going to say, and now we are 10,000 downloads away from 1 million.
Oh my God.
That will probably be
which will be this week.
This week.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, 1 million.
Wow. It's pretty amazing.
It's just a
come on. We thought it might just be for our families and just a few of them, like just a few of our family members.
All right. So Pep, I'm going to ask you a question.
1 million.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't think, no, well, at least if I have, I don't remember asking you this question before.
Yeah.
As we've said here many times, I'm amazed, and it's just beautiful to watch you at your craft, and that craft includes anything from acting to. I know that when we were doing seasons, somebody mentioned that one thing where you step off the helicopter with the machine gun. I don't even remember that. Okay, like for our listening audience, they're like, Pepper Sweeney steps off a helicopter with a machine gun.
They aren't going to want to go there. That's all I know.
But the one that I do remember that was like, oh my gosh, was the music video with.
Oh yeah, you were the dad.
You were the dad.
Carrie Underwood.
With Carrie Underwood. Knowing you, like just knowing, because I know, I like, oh my gosh, how did he do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so
you mean because it flies in the face of who he is?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, knowing that he's not, an angry alcoholic dad, but also being aware of, some of the things that we've talked about acting and so forth, and what you have to bring to it, in the story of the, coming up the elevator and all, or the elevator's broken, all those things. And it just like really strikes me about all the practice and hard work and all those kinds of things that are just so beautiful. And so I'm curious, because this is your vocation, and now, and you're translating this now, not just into your acting, but in like producing and directing and all like you only have like about 27 deadlines at any given time that you're having to juggle with all this production work that you're doing. But I know this is long-winded.
There's a question here somewhere.
Yeah, and the question is, like, I'm really curious what the story, like, how and who said to you at some point, who said to you, you can be an art critic?
Yeah.
Who, like, what was your version, like, when it came to acting?
Well, I mean,
somewhere it's like, it's somewhere between, like, there you are in third grade, and then 10th grade, and then the next thing you know, like,
right. Well, in third grade, I wrote the Christmas play.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
Yeah, and
I didn't even know to pick third grade.
and so in third grade I wrote
You're
the
like
Christmas play.
you're like Jesus. You're like
And they
Jesus in the temple.
we produced
At
it. I
age
mean, it was
12.
like they picked it. Everybody, people brought in real plays and everything, and they picked my play. So the third grader, and then, like your son, I went to an all boys high school, and freshman year, I had to take the bus to like the public bus to school. It was a kind of, and they were doing tryouts for the play.
Yeah.
And I rode the bus down, and I went to the door, went in the school, went to the door, heard them in there auditioning and doing their thing. And I chickened out, and I turned around and got back on the bus and went home. And probably junior year in high school.
Okay, wait. And when you went home, like,
did you wrote?
No, this was
ninth grade.
Okay.
This was
Sorry.
Yeah. So wait, so when you went home, did you tell anybody? Did anybody ask like, "Hey, how'd it go?
I don't even know if anybody knew I was going.
Huh.
I was really nervous about it. I was, yeah, I was being dumb. And so
wait. A question. So at that point in time, I'm wondering, like, to what degree did you have like anybody in your family or anybody where you were saying like, I like the notion of acting? I mean, like, you already done this thing in third grade where you wrote a play. I mean, were there conversations that that were taking place where people noticed that?
I think my mom probably noticed it. There was, when I was really young, there was a guy had a local TV show. It was like kind of a variety show kind of thing. His name was Paul Dixon. And he just made everybody so happy and just made it like he just entertained. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And, so, but it was, I grew up in Kentucky. It's not, nobody else was doing it. It wasn't like there were people blazing the trail ahead of me that I would, and so, so, and then, you get into high school, and then if you go into the theater, then you're in the theater group, and you can't, like, you're stuck in that. And there was that whole thing back then, which was so dumb. And anyway, so by the time I was a junior in high school, the English teacher came to me and she's like, "You have got to audition for the play." I was like, "What?"
How did she know that?
I was on the speech team. I probably, I would always volunteer to read in class.
Wow.
So,
God bless her.
So I auditioned for the play, and that was the first play that I was ever really in.
How did it feel?
The third, it was awesome.
Just like you felt like you were home.
Right. So exactly. And so then, I got into college, and, you're still like, this is a pipe dream. You can't, so I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go into broadcast journalism, and, and that'll be my creative outlet. That's a safer bet. And, so I minored in theater and, majored in communication broadcast journalism. And then, when I got out of college, it was like, okay, because it was always like, you've got to have something to fall back on. You got to have something to fall back on. That was the mantra at my house. And so when I got out of university, that's when I went and auditioned for Burt Reynolds Theater in Florida.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, this is so at that point, I mean, I was doing a fair amount of theater in college, and I had got accepted to one of my professors was trying to get me into the Berkshires for summer stock and all that kind of thing. And then I went down and auditioned for that program. And then I spent the next over a year just doing nothing but every aspect of theater for a year. And from there, I went to New York very briefly. I got cast in a play in a different part of Florida, and then went back and did that, and then drove across the country to California for that's kind of the short
Cliff Notes
version. Yeah.
So I think it's clear to me that I have not heard that story before, and it just feels like a real honor to hear it. I'm just so delighted to hear it. And I'm like you said, Aim, like, holy cow, what was that English teacher's name?
Yeah.
Well,
you just
it's so interesting that you asked me that, because she like, I had her for part of the year, and then she got married and changed her name. And I was just the other day trying to think of what was her name. So I got to find out.
Wow.
I'll have it for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I just, again, it's such a powerful testimony to someone coming into our life and seeing something that we don't see. And in fact, a thing that in your situation, not as if in your family it was explicitly and actively condemned or,
right.
shown contempt, but it doesn't sound like it was actively encouraged. It's not like people were kind of like cutting a wide path for you to say, like, look, if you want to do this, let's find you a way to do this.
Yeah.
Right. I think that I will say my mom was always very encouraging. She was always like, you can do it. But, if it wasn't for her encouragement, I never would have gone to Florida to even attempt this audition. I mean, it was a little bit heady to think that I was going to go down and be one of 12 people out of the country that were going to be chosen for a theater school when I wasn't even a theater major.
Right.
And I walk into this room full of dancers.
Yeah.
As you've heard that, I've told that story already, but yeah, it just, yeah.
I just love that whole notion of someone coming to find you, naming, right? That teacher naming something that she sees and turning the stone over and saying, oh my gosh, look what's here.
Yeah.
Which vocationally then, I mean, I look at where that has led in so many different ways. It's just right. But I mean, I mean, here we are. It's just a beautiful thing.
It is.
That's a great story. I love that story.
Thanks for asking. Yeah.
I remember I was I was in medical school, and for the first 2 years I was just miserable because I wasn't really sure what I was doing there. I think I've told you guys this, right? Have I told you this? Yeah, I was miserable for the first 2 years, and then as I tell people, when they say, "Well, how did you discover psychiatry?" No, I don't. I think it found me, not the other way around. And then once I became enamored with that, and then I'm like, oh yeah, but I don't know how to make sense of this as a believer, and how do you go into the world? And then I had an encounter with a physician who was a pediatrician, but who said, if I hadn't become a pediatrician, I would have been a psychiatrist. And I was, I felt worried, afraid, ashamed, I don't have what it takes. I don't to be in this profession as a believer, and I don't know how to make sense of these things. This whole sense that not unlike, in the story that we were telling, this notion that in Henry's story, he's got this idea, but it's all this other confusing stuff that gets, battered around because of what shame tends to do. And then she said to me, this physician said, yeah, and the reason that we don't have the kind of answers to your question about what do we do as believers is because nobody's created them and somebody needs to.
There you go.
And I mean, and I felt like I felt like an angel had been dropped into my path, with orders.
Oh.
Like Gabriel coming to Mary and saying, Just want to let you know, this is what you'll be doing for the next, several decades.
And it probably answered the question for you, like, how do I do this as a believer? You do it as a believer.
Right. But the thing is like I'm like looking back and I'm like, oh, it's not like she gave me information. She gave me herself.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this one was the director of medical education at Emory University. Like, so like she's got chops.
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying to me some, like, I don't, who I'm just like I'm just a fourth year med student. Like, what? I don't. And it's like someone with authority, someone who sees something that I don't see.
Yeah.
She doesn't know me from Adam.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the new heaven and earth to show up.
Yeah.
I'm going to go find her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go find her. And Pep, once we find out the name of that teacher of yours, then we'll be able to find her too. We'll have to go through the log and get her name right. And then
I've got it right. I've got my yearbook right in here in the closet, so I'll pull it out. And
that's great.
I'm embarrassed that I couldn't.
I know. I don't
name.
know my my art teacher's name, art history.
I had a couple of months ago, a listener DM'd me, and wanted to ask me questions because I think she's raising her grandson. Her grandson like wanted to be an actor, and he did all these plays in high school, and then it was over and he was not knowing what to do or where to turn, or he was feeling this emptiness, and it's been a while, but I wrote back and just sort of made some recommendations and tried to encourage. And I got a note from her the other day with a picture of him. He went and auditioned like at this sort of I don't know what you would even call it. It was this event where all these different schools were there and different casting agents and all this. And anyway, he won the whole thing and got
holy
cow. Yeah, it's very cool,
dude.
Very cool. Yeah,
you're the English teacher.
Well,
I don't know about that. I think she's the English teacher.
Oh my gosh,
very, very cool.
But then, like the bakery counter, we'll see somebody this week. We'll see a lot of people this week. It's
I was thinking about that too. I mean, I know we've gone so long here. But,
gosh, YouTube listeners are
just thinking about the idea of, we have to take care of ourselves so that when we get to the bakery counter, we're in the right space. Like it's important.
We're able to,
right? We're able
to. Yeah.
And there's a lot of times where you get so in your own, or Pepper gets so in his own crap and his own stuff that I miss those encounters, and those are my favorite. Like those are that's the meat. That's and
well, I just want to pause you for a second and say, like, so you get a message, you get a DM from someone. And how easy it is, like, no, I got these 27 deadlines.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't have time to answer that.
Yeah.
So I either don't, or I'm like well-intended. I'll get to it if I get to it. And the next thing you know, 3 weeks go by and and now I don't even think of it. Maybe it's something that reminds me of it or whatever. And in a world that is pressing us for time and all the things that it's doing, I want to commend you. For pausing and breathing long enough, and for turning your attention to her and by extension to him. And I just want to say well done, because I know what your desk looks like, despite never having seen your desk. From the conversations that the three of us have had, we know what your desk looks like, and I am just really struck with the beauty of that moment, of that bakery counter moment, as Amy said, or you said. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, that's great.
All right,
Okay,
guys.
guys.
Have a great
All
week.
right, then.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at Being Known Pod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.